It's time now for the award-winning #1 local talk show in Northeast Pennsylvania, The Sam Lesante Show. Now here's your host, Sam Lesante.
Welcome to The Sam Lesante Show, folks. I'm Sam Lesante. My guest today, no stranger to The Sam Lesante Show, Dr. David Moylan. He is the coroner of Schuylkill County, and he's up for re-election, running May 21st, the election is on May 21st. And he's here today to talk about what he's done. And you know, folks, these people promise, and did he live up to his promises? And the fact that when you have a row officer, whether it's a commissioner or any row officer, sometimes we begin to wonder, well, what do they do? And how does that affect me as a citizen of Schuylkill County? When you have efficient people in office that are doing their job, they save you taxpayers money. When you have people who who are not experienced and do not know what they're doing, they cost you money. That's why it's so important to understand who's running for office. Dave, it's nice to see you.
Sam, I was just reflecting back when I first campaigned for coroner was 8 years ago.
Yeah.
And that's when we became friends.
Yes.
And that's I regard it as one of the high points in my life.
Well, not only that, Dave, I got to know you as a person, not as well as a coroner. But today we're going to talk about the serious matter. You're an elected official, and you're running again. You're going for your third term. I'm always, as anyone says, well, they promise you this, they promise you that. Okay, so what did you promise? And then I want to know, did you fulfill those promises?
Well, I looked over my campaign brochure from 8 years ago, and one of the things that I wanted to highlight was digitizing the records in the coroner's office. And we've been able to accomplish that in the first year. We were initially working with a company called East Seaton. They subsequently went out of business. Now we're with a computerized company called Forensic Filer. But it's just a boon just to have access to the records, and it's very secure. Nobody can hack into the records or anything, and that was working very well.
Why is that important, Dave?
Well, for instance, the deputy can be entering data through a handheld device right on the scene, and that becomes available to us, and then we in turn can share it with the appropriate authorities such as law enforcement. So, and then going back, oftentimes we're contacted a couple years after a case has been closed from an insurance company, legal matters, whatever, family that just wants some closure, and we have access to that information on a ready basis. So the electronic record was an accomplishment. The other thing that I want to emphasize was education of the deputies. And they are county employees, but basically I regard them as selfless volunteers. And they will go out anytime, day or night, to investigate a death. And we started a monthly conference, which we continue to this day, bring in speakers. In fact, we have brought in Eric Micah, who has been an excellent source of information on coroner's law and next of kin law, things like that. But that's an ongoing educational concern. But we've also started a forensic conference that we're now in our 8th year, and here's the brochure for the upcoming one on April 27th. It's an 8-hour conference, and for the last 7 years, all our conferences have been approved by the state attorney general's office, because coroners and chief deputy coroners are required to have 8 hours of continuing education per year. So this satisfies this. We've had coroners come in from far western part of the state, Washington County, North Lackawanna County, down to Berks and Lancaster County. So it's caught on. And
is this open to the public?
No, it's not. This is pretty much for professionals.
All right.
But this year we're opening it to first responders, EMTs, right, nursing personnel, and also law enforcement, both state and local law enforcement officers. And
So you see fire and injury professionals as well. Okay, and what will they learn by that?
well, we have a wonderful faculty this year, Re-Elect.
Yeah.
His son is actually a Supreme Court justice in Pennsylvania, but he's a MD, but also has a legal background. And he's, I'd say, a nationally renowned pathologist. He'll be coming in from Pittsburgh. He's going to talk about celebrated cases that he's involved in. You often see him on CNN where he's commenting on autopsy findings on some of these celebrated and controversial cases. So he's going to talk to our group on that. But I also have a woman named Tiffany Brown. I met her out on a trip out to Las Vegas when I visited the coroner's office in Clark County, which is Las Vegas. And she's going to come in and talk to all our professionals about the Mandalay Bay shooting, which happened in October a year ago. And you know, how do you handle 58 bodies in one day?
Yes.
I'm really looking forward to hearing from her.
The purpose of this, you know, as I'm looking, as I'm saying, well, okay, well, why should I be concerned about it as a resident of Schuylkill County? Why is this important to me as a resident, this particular
the symposium
symposium.
Well, again, we're aiming to educate not only our own deputy coroner force, but the coroners in the region. So a more informed deputy coroner force is going to perform better.
Okay.
But you also will notice in there that one of the topics that I'm going to talk about, and also Dr. Re-Elect, he's going to comment on it because he's written on the benefits of the virtual autopsy. But what isn't a virtual autopsy?
Yeah.
And I would like to share that with your viewers.
We have virtual autopsy. Okay, here again, as a citizen of Schuylkill County, is, well, why do we need it? What's the cost? Why is it important, okay, to have a virtual autopsy? And do we have qualified people there performing this virtual autopsy?
It's more than just a post-mortem CAT scan. That's what everybody thinks of. And it's not a new procedure. It's been out there since probably good 30 years ago. The Israelis did a lot of initial work on it, and the Swiss, they have very advanced programs. But it has kind of caught on, and when I came on board in 2012, we went down to the University of Maryland, and they have a very active program there. And Professor Barry Daly has been a trusted advisor on this. But since we started the program in 2012, we've done over 1,300 procedures. And we find it extremely helpful for trauma and natural deaths. You can see so much. And that's what an autopsy is. It's seeing for oneself. But the virtual autopsy allows us to do it non-invasively.
And what's the difference in cost?
Okay. The Pennsylvania Coroners Association reports that on average, an open traditional autopsy costs close to $3,000. Okay. When we initially started the program in Schuylkill County, we were paying $200 per scan. And it's kind of like when you buy a VCR when they first came out, they were tremendously expensive. But over the years, we've been able to reduce the cost to the county to under $100 per scan. So we're comparing a virtual autopsy for $100 versus a open autopsy for anywhere from $2,100 to $3,000.
Okay, so do we get the same effect from the actual?
I'm going to be the first to say that a virtual autopsy is not a replacement for an open autopsy. There's a couple procedures and conditions that would basically be invisible on a CAT scan. But, and one of those is a blood clot going up to the lungs. The CAT scans measure density, and the embolism to the lung would be the same density. So that could be missed. And again, sometimes coronary artery disease, which would precipitate a heart attack. Sometimes there's no calcium in the arteries of the heart. We can see the calcium, but when there is something called soft plaque, that could still cause a heart attack without being evident on the CAT scan.
So basically, when you looked at 1,300 of these, all right, of the 1,300 virtual autopsies you did, how many of those would have had to actually have an actual autopsy?
Well, again, in a case where murder is suspected, or perhaps vehicular homicide, where somebody, a perpetrator or a driver, impaired driver, might have to pay for it with their life or with jail time. There's cases where we go right to a open autopsy, but we have on hand the virtual autopsy, which gives you radiographs of the whole body.
Yeah.
And on a few cases where we had to get supplemental x-rays in addition to the CT scan, the cost has been $600 or $700 for just x-rays, which do not give you the same clarity that you can get with the postmortem CAT scan.
Mm-hmm. So what I'm trying to figure out in my mind is, because you have initiated the virtual autopsies, you've done 1,300 so far. If I'm saying that of the 1,300, they would have had, maybe 300 would actually have had to go through autopsies, or 1,000 actually if we didn't have virtual autopsy, okay?
Yep.
I'm trying to look at, well, what would be the savings here in the years that you saved the county?
Well, looking back historically,
Yeah.
what's the record show in Schuylkill County? And at one time they were doing up to 300 open autopsies, traditional autopsies per year.
Okay.
And
So you're looking at roughly $3,000.
And when I took over in 2012, the year before they had done approximately 110.
Okay.
Our first year, it dropped down to 50.
Okay.
And it stayed roughly in that ballpark since then.
All right.
Sometimes it goes up a little bit to 60 or so. And particularly in the setting of the opioid crisis.
Yeah.
That has really
Yeah, and
walloped our budget
so
on things.
basically what I'm trying to figure out then, there's been a tremendous, based on what you just told me, as a taxpayer now,
Yeah.
okay, and you're looking to be reelected, I want to know you're doing your job, and if you're saving money, so you probably saved the county a couple $100,000 easy.
I would say,
Yeah,
over
easy.
the years. Yeah.
All right, so if you did not have the virtual autopsy, and if it wasn't for Dr. Dave Moylan initiating this, the budget for the county would have had an extra $200,000-$300,000 that they would have to come up with to pay for autopsies.
I'm not sure the exact figure, but
Well,
it would definitely increase.
Yeah, I
for
mean, it's
sure.
100,000 to, even if it's 100,000, I know it has to be more than 100,000. The fact is, the matter is that once you have to spend that money, and then the budget and the commissioners have to say, okay, look, we need this. Well, where are we going to get this money? Well, now we have to put a tax on, the Schuylkill County residents, because again, every row officer has their own budgets to work with.
Yeah.
What I'm trying to relate here, Dave, is why is it so important to put people in who know what they're doing, okay? Because in essence, it does save me money as a taxpayer.
Yeah.
Am I correct in saying that?
Well, pretty much, I want to tell you a little bit about our current staff.
Yeah.
I've been practicing therapeutic radiology for some 40 years. My chief deputy is Dr. Joe Weber from Ashland. He's been doing internal medicine in our county for longer than that. And for the coming months, I've been able to recruit 2 other physicians that are going to join the staff. And one of the administrators asked me, well, how much are you going to pay these new doctors that are going to be deputies? And I said that would be the going rate of $15 an hour.
Wow.
So they're not doing it for money.
No way.
They're doing
Absolutely.
it. They're
No.
doing it for love of
Absolutely. That's
of the
just
profession
totally,
and the
yeah,
thing.
Yeah. And
So,
you're very fortunate to do that.
Yeah.
Okay? Yeah.
But again, I mentioned that I'm a therapeutic radiologist, and every day of my practice, I'm looking at CAT scans to design where to put the radiation where the tumor is and spare the normal tissue. So that has given me a good fund of knowledge on normal anatomy and pathologic anatomy. But there's cases that I see, and I'm scratching my head, but I've got consultants, for instance, for the brain. I'll often call on Dr. John Chaulick, who's one of our neurologists in Schuylkill County, and he's been very free with his advice on ferreting out diagnoses in more difficult brain cases. And the same thing with our body CAT scanning, Dr. Mark Caliendo, another great friend, and he has diagnostic radiology background. So it's good in the profession to have these resources.
Mm-hmm. Well, here again, you've been in there for 8 years. And what I have to look at is, do we want to keep you in there as a coroner, all right? There have been some concerns that you hear, some people may say, well, you don't have to be a doctor to be a coroner, all right? What do you say when someone says to you, well, I don't have to be a doctor to be a coroner, I could do the job?
No, well, certainly that's the law.
Yeah.
Is you don't have to be a doctor to be a coroner. And when I was elected coroner, we had to take an intensive 1-week course down at the State Police Academy. And these were 8-10-hour sessions and covered the whole gamut of forensic medicine. But you don't have to be a physician or an MD, but I think it helps. In the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, there's 67 counties, and only about 10 of those counties have physicians in the helm, coroner physicians. And of course, Pittsburgh, they've got 10 physicians, or that's Allegheny County, or Philadelphia County, they've got 10 physicians. But of the smaller counties, there's only about 10 that have physicians. And I am proud to say that Schuylkill County is one of these, and we not only have, we also have the chief deputy is a physician, and I'm, again, hope within the next month or two to have these other 2 physicians on board. So you don't have to be, but shouldn't you be?
Shouldn't you be? Folks, I'm talking to Dr. Dave Moylan. He is the current Schuylkill County coroner. Facts are facts. 8 years, you see what happens. It's the savings that each row officer do. We've had Marie Casey on, we've had Martha Marchuk on, and they talked about, just specifically what they're doing and how in turn they save you, Schuylkill County residents, money. We'll be back right after this. Welcome back to the Sam Lesante Show, folks. Remember May 21st, a very important day. Please vote. We have a coroner from Schuylkill County, Dave Moylan here, Dr. Dave Moylan, talking about what he has accomplished, what he's done. He's looking for re-election on May 21st. He's been there 8 years. You talked about virtual autopsy, okay? And so what we want to do is educate. This is what you brought to the coroner's office.
Yes.
In turn, has saved hundreds of thousands of dollars throughout the years, okay? Because of your expertise. So let's go through, and folks, we're going to put this on the screen. So it's an education. It's really interesting, even if you're not in Schuylkill County. Talk about this.
All right. What is the virtual autopsy?
Right.
And it's certainly, we didn't invent it.
Yeah.
And in fact, I mentioned that a Swiss doctor had started it 35 years ago. And in fact, he has copyrighted the term virtopsy, virtual autopsy. So I don't use virtopsy too much, or otherwise I have to send him a nickel every time I talk about it, And we start off the virtual autopsy by weighing the decedent. And we have special scale, it can be reported out, kilograms, pounds. And then next we take the patient to our morgue, and we're able to do photography, close-up photography, and under operating room conditions. The next thing is that we're going to even fingerprint some cases, particularly forensic incidents. And, we've had some cases where identity is an issue. So having the fingerprints on file is very important. The next thing we'll do is remove certain body fluids, mainly blood, but we also check the urine and other fluids, bile, whatever. And these are important for toxicology, which again, we're deluged with toxicology problems related to the opioid crisis. We've been saving samples of blood on special cards for future DNA testing. Sometimes a paternity issue might come up. We've got the DNA preserved indefinitely. We recently had a case. Again, the virtual autopsy is very useful in trauma. And we saw the chest cavity was filled with a fluid. Well, what kind of fluid? I didn't know. So we will introduce a needle through the skin, and again, it's minimally invasive to remove the fluid. In this particular case, it was all blood. The man had been injured during an automobile accident. So thoracentesis is part of the virtual autopsy in our hands. Same thing might apply to the abdomen. We had a case about a year ago, and there was an unexplained mass in the middle of the abdomen. Under CAT scan guidance, we were able to introduce biopsy needles, again, not opening the body up, but to determine the nature of this mass, which certainly wasn't suspected during life. The next is an endoscope. That's a reminder for me to talk about the use of endoscopy. And everybody's familiar with colonoscopy, EGD for looking at the stomach, or bronchoscopy for looking at the airway. We've used this several times to evaluate stomach bleeding, or in fire victims, if the person was breathing at the time of the demise, there oftentimes is soot in the upper airway, and we can see that endoscopically, and again, could obviate the need for opening the body up. The next slide is me next to our CAT scanner, and again, we've done 1,300 cases in the last 8 years. But I had an interesting experience about a week ago. We had a pathologist from outside the area doing an open case for us, and he said, okay, but what did the MRI scan show? And the MRI, which is depicted here, is much more sensitive for neural tissue for the brain. And I've only been able to get one MRI in the last 8 years, but it's something that I will now be considering. And again, I've got to tell you that the annual conference done at no cost to the taxpayer, and the investment that we made in our mobile morgue, and again in the CAT scanner itself at no charge to the acquiring the capital equipment at no charge to the taxpayer. So MRI might be something in the next 4 years that we'd like to consider. And the next image is that of the mobile morgue. That's where we do our open autopsies. When I took over in 2012, the local hospitals got out of the forensic business altogether, so we had to do some scrambling, and this was our answer to it. We had an old CT trailer, got rid of the CAT scan, and set up a mobile morgue in there. And again, this might even have use to be moved in the county to an area of trauma or mass casualty.
When you look at all this stuff, okay, so what, unless you're affected by it, okay, for example, these are very serious things that you're doing, particularly in terms of investigation, if it's your loved one that got, died or whatever. So this is important in how many respects?
Well, again, our charge is to determine the cause, but also the manner. Yeah. And many times before I will rule on the manner, I want to get the family members in, and we have a conference where I can show them the CT scan, review the toxicology, and translate the medicalese into English for them.
And does this have to do with sometimes either insurances or investigations, or, so why is, I'm trying to relate is that this is why it's so important.
Yes, I'm going to say a lot of the funerals and final dispositions are funded by insurances. Okay. So the insurance company wants a certificate they can work with.
Again, when I'm trying, as a common person out there who's just understanding what the coroners do, it may not affect them today, but God forbid it could affect them. And then, thank God we have this technology So it helps me as an individual person.
I agree with that.
So what's next?
What's next? We're wrestling with the opioid crisis, and I almost call it the zombification of our youth. But it's not limited to our youth. We're seeing overdoses in people in their 50s and even 60s. So this is a big challenge that I'd like to continue to try to impact in the next 4 years, working with our local law enforcement, the DA, Mike Opake, very interested in this. Jimmy Goodman, who's the judge in charge of the drug court. I think these are tools that are going to be useful. But you just cannot perform autopsies on all these drug cases. We had, 1 year we had 79, 80 cases, and we just can't do it. So what I'm going to do after the May election, I'm traveling to the CDC, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. It's down in Atlanta, and I'm going to present our CAT scan experience for the opioid deaths. And there's some characteristic findings in the brain, in the lungs, and coupled with ruling out other causes of death and a well-designed toxicology level, I'm going to say that would obviate the need for opening these bodies up. And the director of the CDC is an old classmate, Dr. Robert Redfield. I'm hoping that I can get some guidance from him, maybe even some funding, to validate this experience.
Dave, you're running for re-election in the primary on May 21st. You're a Republican, okay? What if I'm a Democrat and I want to vote for you?
When you think about it, Sam, our political affiliations are almost accidents of birth, like the color of our skin.
Exactly.
But I would like to reach across the aisle, and my friends who are Democrat, I would ask them for their support on May 21st, and if they could write me in, David J. Moylan, and I would be very grateful for their support.
Well, I got to say this. I know you have over 8 years. Every time you've been on this show, you've stated things and you've lived up to them. You've never lied, you never deceived, and you gave promises. And I think what more can we ask for any elected official or someone's running for office? They maybe promises, but you fulfilled that obligation. I wish you well, and I wish everybody else is running well, okay?
Sure.
Dr. Dave Moylan, folks, he's running for re-election, Schuylkill County Coroner, May 21st. He's asking for your vote, and for Democrats, write his name in, David J. Moylan. We'll see you next time.